Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a new exciting episode of Pulp today. I'm your host, David Avallone, and with me today is the fantastic Mr. Gary Phillips.
Thanks for having me, David.
Oh, my pleasure, Gary. Tell the kids at home a little bit about yourself, Gary.
I've been around for a while, as you can tell by this roadmap of a face, and I write crime fiction mostly. I guess hard-boiled would be the subgenre you would place me under, I suppose, with a subcategory of noir. Mm-hmm. But I've also written some comics, as you have, David, and I've written quite a few short stories, and I've edited several anthologies, including the Obama Inheritance, 15 Stories of Conspiracy Noir, that won the Anthony Award. I think that was in 2018. Yeah, 2018.
Nice.
And I have a new book just out now called One Shot Harry, set in '63 in Los Angeles. And it's been getting some lovely reviews all over the place. And it's in a hardback from Soho Crime, which is part of Soho Press.
That's fantastic. I hadn't been following that, so I'll have to pick that up. I have to say this episode's been a long time coming. You have the unique position, for want of a better word. You're the only person people have said to me, "Oh, I watched Pulp today. You got to get Gary Phillips on there." Combination of obviously your talent, but mostly like that voice. Who doesn't want to hear? Who doesn't want to hear classic fiction read in that voice?
There you go. This is my dad's voice, and my son, who's how old is he now? Is he 35? Oh my God, my son is 35, and his voice is deeper than mine. So there you go.
Hard to believe, but yeah, and to be absolutely honest, I've been wanting to do a Chester Himes episode for a really long time, but I don't think my voice is the voice to read Chester Himes with. I think that would be inappropriate is probably the kindest word.
So, who knows?
So when you brought up Himes as a possibility for the episode, I was like, oh, finally I get to do a Chester Himes episode. So you wanted to read from Cotton Comes to Harlem,
right,
which is part of a series involving two police detectives named Coffin Ed and Gravedigger Jones.
Yes. Oh wait, here we go. That's a better cover to you. That's not the Coffin. That's not the Cotton Comes to Harlem color, but it's a better kind of cover that gives you a sense of the books.
Yeah, I have the Real Cool Killers from that series, from that collection, and those are really well put together books. But tell us a little bit about Cotton Comes to Harlem and about that series.
So Chester Himes, for the folks that don't know, real quick, was really he has a big story, and there's two biographies of Chester Himes that I would recommend. One is by James Salas, who's himself something of a fine writer, not something of a fine writer. He is a fine writer, and I know him somewhat. And his is an earlier biography, and there's a fairly recent one by Lawrence P. Jackson. Anyway, so both of those should be looked at. It should be noted that Himes did time in prison, Ohio State Penitentiary. But even then he was writing or doing short stories that were printed in Esquire, that were published in Esquire. And he knocked around. He came out to California. He was out here in the 40s. He actually had a brief stint as a screenwriter at Warner Brothers, though there's a somewhat infamous story about that time, which is recounted in Mike Davis's City of Quartz book.
Oh yeah, which, by the way, let's just do a sidebar. That's a fantastic book.
Isn't it? Yeah.
City of Quartz. Someone basically handed that to me when I arrived in Los Angeles, and I'm very glad they did, because it was
That's right. It's sort of a social political excavation of the history of Los Angeles,
and particularly on Los Angeles as a city of exiles and refugees.
Right. There you go.
Who built the culture. I always compare Los Angeles to Casablanca. We're all here waiting for our letters of transit.
Exactly.
But
we
yeah,
came
go
from the
on,
water
sorry.
and look what we got. So yeah,
Yeah.
but that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And in fact, just another sidebar to take us down that road for just one more second.
Sure.
It is certainly one of the books that, for instance, I just mentioned. I have this novel set in '63, and certainly it's Mike's book. Actually, Mike has another book that he co-wrote called Los Angeles in the '60s with John Wiener, and it's even more massive than City of Quartz, and that's got some great anecdotal stuff that I use. Fire This Time by Gerald Horne.
Sure.
And I'll just finish then with Joe Dominic's book, which is called To Protect and Serve, the LAPD's Century of War in the City of Dreams. And it's a history of the LA Police Department.
Wow.
So anyway, all those to say is that those are the tomes that I have literally sitting next to my computer. Not
Sure.
This is a little portable computer. I got to do this because you kids have these cameras in them. But I have an old computer upstairs, and I have it sitting next to my desk.
Sure.
So Himes comes out here. He writes then what would be considered mainstream novels, particularly If He Hollers, Let Him Go,
Which
and
is a classic.
Yes, and The Lonely Crusade. But they don't do as well as he would have liked. Through a series of things and incidents, he eventually moves, like James Baldwin. He leaves the States for somewhat greener pastures, both in a racial sense and political sense and career sense, and winds up in the 50s. I think it's tail end of the 50s, writing a series or beginning to write a series of novels set in Harlem. And people should be mindful that Himes knew about as much about Harlem as I know about Istanbul, and I mean he'd been there a time or two, but he wasn't, he wasn't a denizen of Harlem. He wasn't, yeah. And I think stuff he found on a map or just looked up in other books.
Yeah.
And so, but really, this lends to the character and the absurdist nature, as people have pointed out, of these novels. The first novel is called For Love of Immabel, which was retitled A Rage in Harlem some years later.
Yep.
Coffin Ed Johnson and Gravedigger Jones, his two Harlem detectives, they're in that first book, but very minimally. They're not in there a lot. And in fact, there's a movie, right? Rage in Harlem.
Excellent movie. And if I remember correctly, it's Bill Duke's directorial debut.
Yes.
It's beautifully directed. It's a great film, has a beautiful score by Elmer Bernstein. And if I remember correctly, he hired a couple of great old character actors / stand-up comics to play Coffin Ed.
George Wallace plays one of them. Yes.
So great.
Oh yeah. But even in the movie, right? They're barely there, right? They kind of show up now and then, and they're kind of toward the end, which is actually true to the source material. Yeah. But because these were the two, and another little segue, but a kind of an important segue. This is in Jackson's biography of Himes, and I've read a couple of accounts elsewhere. Himes apparently was inspired by two Black LAPD detectives here in the 40s in Los Angeles to create his two characters. A man named Jess Kimbrough and another man named Charles Brody. And in fact, another little segue for those who are really interested, Kimbrough, later in life, published his own novel called Defender of the Angels. And in that novel, Strike Hinton is his alter ego. And it recounts a Black cop, a Black detective's forays in those early days, or at least in the 30s and 40s in Los Angeles as a police detective. So all that to say is that all this then becomes the meat for what will become the second novel, right? Cotton Comes to Harlem, which is really sort of the first novel where we really have Coffin Ed and Gravedigger center stage.
Yeah. And how many books are there in the series?
I think 8, but I may be wrong about that. because by the time we get to Blind Man with a Pistol, which is the last one published before his death, because then Plan B shows up later, but now that's even less about Coffin and Engraver, though they are there in a fashion. Plan B, it's a crazy book to read because it starts initially with a plot. And then about halfway in, I think Himes figured out or said, well, you know what? I really want to go do this other thing. And so I'm going to start to have them characters really veer off. And if I'm not mistaken, well, I don't want to give it away. I don't want to give it away for people to read.
Sure. Spoiler alert for a 30-year-old, for a 50-year-old book.
Exactly, for a 50-year-old book. But suffice it to say that by the time he gets to the second part of that book, it's just off and running, and it's wild. So yeah.
Before you start reading, you hit on a theme that I'm fascinated by with the career arc. I feel like everyone starts out wanting to write the great American novel, and when it doesn't work out for them, they sort of discover genre.
Yeah.
And for the better writers, all of the brilliance and heart and reality that they're bringing to their original novels is in their genre novels.
Right.
Famously, I think Philip K. Dick goes through this. He writes a bunch of fairly mediocre serious novels and a bunch of fairly mediocre science fiction pop boilers. It's when he decides to take his science fiction novels seriously and graft his serious ideas, but with robots.
Exactly.
With aliens, then he creates something new and glorious and original. And my dad, who was a pulp fiction hard-boiled writer like you are, he wrote 6 novels before the 6th one was published.
Wow.
The kind of like stick-to-itiveness you don't get a lot. And those first 5 are all serious novels, and they didn't sell. And he looked at the market and went, well, Mickey Spillane's doing well. I guess I can channel my life experience into a guy with a Colt 45 and a pork pie hat in Manhattan.
Right.
And he writes The Tall Dolores, which is his first mystery. And those books become just as personal and just as autobiographical. As you know, no one can stop writing autobiography. We all do it. You know, it would be more work to not be autobiographical.
Yeah, right.
That's strip yourself out of your genre novels would be exhausting.
Yes.
Compared to just giving the world what you are and what you believe. But anyway, I didn't realize I had never thought about Himes having a similar. And you know, If He Hollers, Let Him Go is still a crime novel.
Yes.
You know, there is a crime. It's a very dark. Was that ever filmed? I can't remember if that was ever filmed.
No, I don't believe so.
I mean, certainly when it was written, no one would have filmed that.
That's
book.
right. That's right. That's right.
No studio in the world would have sat down and thrown money at anyone to make that movie. Maybe Stanley Kramer would have tried it in '62 when he was making Message Pictures. Yeah. But he had Inherit the Wind to make. But anyway, let's dive into Coffin, Ed, and Gravedigger in Cotton Comes to Harlem.
And let me mention too, Michael, that as we're talking about it, this is actually really not. This is actually here we go. Put it in the camera. This is actually a library book. I actually do have this dang book, and it's more in the from this series when it was done. Oh, wait, let me get in right in the camera. There we go. It was when this was done. But some of my fiction is tucked away in storage, and it just was easier to just go to the dang library and get the book.
Sure.
Yeah. So what I'm gonna read just a little bit that gives us a bit of who Coffin and Gravedigger are, and like that. Then we'll talk about it a little bit, maybe, or talk about whatever we want to talk about. The rain had stopped when he got outside, and people were back on the wet sidewalks, strolling aimlessly and looking about as if to see what might have been washed from heaven. They walked up a couple of blocks where the little black battered sedan with the supercharged motor was parked. It had got much cleaner from the rain. You've got to take it easy, Ed. Man, Gravedigger said. One more second and you'd have killed her. Coffin Ed took away the handkerchief and found that his nose had stopped bleeding. He got into the car without replying. He felt guilty for fear he might have gotten Digger into trouble, but for his part, he didn't care. Gravedigger understood. Ever since the hoodlum had thrown acid into his face, Coffin Head had no tolerance for crooks. He was too quick to blow up and too dangerous for safety in his sudden rages. But hell, Gravedigger thought, what can one expect? Those colored hoodlums had no respect for colored cops unless you beat it into them or blew them away. He just hoped those slick boys wouldn't play it too cute. The trucks were still where they had been wrecked, guarded by harnessed cops and surrounded by the usual morbid crowd. But they drove on down to where the bodies lay. They found Sergeant Wiley of Homicide beside the body of the bogus detective, talking to a precinct sergeant and looking bored. He was a quiet, gray-haired, scholarly-looking man dressed in a dark summer suit. Everything is wrapped up, he said to them. We're just waiting for the wagon to take them away. He pointed at the body. Know him? They looked him over carefully. He must have been from out of town, eh, Ed? Gravedigger said. Coffin Ed nodded. Sergeant Wiley gave them a rundown. No real identification of any kind, just a phony ID card from the DA's office and a bogus detective shield from headquarters. He had been a big man, but now he looked small and forlorn on the wet street and very dead. They went up and looked at the other body and exchanged looks. Wiley noticed. We're over by the delivery truck, he said. Mean anything? No. He was just a sneak thief. Must have gotten away is all. True moniker was Early Gibson, but he was called Early Riser. Worked with a partner most of the time. We'll try to find his partner. He might give us a lead. Sure as hell ain't got no other, Coffin Ed added. Do that, Wiley said, and let me know what you find out. We're going to take a look at the trucks. Righto, there's nothing more here. We took a statement from the driver of the truck that smashed the armored job and let him go. All he knew was that the three of them looked like, and we know what they look like. Any other witnesses? Gravedigger asked. Hell, you know these people, Jones, all stone blind. What you expect from people who are invisible themselves? Coffin Ed said roughly. So it gives us some insight into these cops, their state of mind. And I should mention that the idea of them both being rough characters, or at least Coffin Ed being a rough character, that also is translated apparently from both Kimbrough and Brody. Mm-hmm. And I read this story once, and I can't remember which one it was, but I want to say it was Brody. I think Brody was the meaner of the two of them. And apparently Brody was so tough, he pistol whipped a white kid and was not reprimanded. Now, this is, 40s Los Angeles, so right. I guess that's just how rough Brody was.
Yeah, you couldn't it'd be hard to get away with that even today.
Even today, yes.
Yeah. That's and yeah, the acid attack is from Rage in Harlem for Love of Immabel.
That's right.
And it's in the movie as well. And
that's right.
It carries forward with Gravedigger and Ed throughout the rest of the
Although you're right, but in the 70s films, the two 70s films, that's not. Raymond St. Jacques is, looks like Raymond St. Jacques. He's very handsome. But he's not scarred by
Raymond St. Jacques and it's not Dick Gregory. Who plays the other?
It's Godfrey Cambridge.
Godfrey Cambridge
plays Gravedigger, and Raymond is Coffin Ed. But Raymond does have Coffin Ed's temper. There's a couple of times in either one of the films, particularly in Cotton Comes to Harlem, where he has to hold him back from beating the guy to death.
Yeah, and what's the sequel called?
Come Back Charleston Blue.
Come Back Charleston Blue. That's right.
But that's not the title of the book, and I forget the title of the book. But it is based on one of the other books, but it's not the title of the book.
And they're moved forward to the 70s. It's only the Bill Duke movie that's a period film.
Yes, that's correct.
I really wanted him to make a sequel with George Wallace.
Yeah.
Make Cotton Comes to Harlem. I mean, why not?
Yeah. Exactly.
And again, that's a perfectly great series for someone to revive even in the present day.
Well, it is, man. Listen, I'm not giving anything away to say that I somewhat I may be back down the rabbit hole. I was trying to chase down not the film rights. I was curious about the literary rights, and because I believe neither Himes nor the second wife, who became the executor of the estate, had children. And so when they died. And their agent apparently outlived, and the agent was like, in her 90s. And she apparently was very hard to deal with, and she passed. So it's unclear at this moment. And not naming names, but I've contacted someone who purportedly has something to do with the estate. But then I was told that it's still in probate, which I can't believe it. How could, you know what I mean? It's been so many years,
decades,
but it goes to show you the mess and the entanglement. Apparently, that's got to be pulled apart, right? I guess Samuel Goldwyn Company still has the film rights, I suppose. Yeah. But as to the literary rights, who knows? So anyway, all that to say is, yes, it would be a great series to revive. And I'm hungering to do an anthology of the two characters with modern day writers, either set in the periods or set in the 70s, however they want to do it, but do that. Yeah.
They're such amazing characters. And probably way easier to pry the comic book rights out of somebody than the movie rights.
Exactly.
I know our friend David Walker did that with the Shaft comic. I had thought that, Dynamite hunted them down, but of course that was a silly thing for me to assume, and found out later that David had hunted down those rights and obtained them, and then sort of made a deal with Dynamite to publish
the package. Exactly. That's right.
Yeah. And those are great comics. He did an amazing job with the character.
Yeah, I know, man, which should have gotten a lot more love than it did.
No, that's, go buy David Walker's Shaft comics, everybody, because those are great, and pick up the Bebop Barbarians.
There you go. There we go. But he also did the novel. He also did Shaft's Revenge that the Dynamite put out, but I don't think they quite understood how to market a paperback, right? Prose. And so
no, they tried to do prose for a little bit, and it didn't. I don't think it washed. I have to say, my favorite Shaft title for things that would not fly in 2022 is Shaft Among the Jews.
Yes,
I saw that in a bookstore when I was a teenager, and that was in the 80s, and I was like, wow, Shaft Among the Jews.
Exactly. That's right.
I think it's set in the Diamond District. It's not an inaccurate title per se.
That's right.
Speaking as one of the Jews, it doesn't particularly offend me. It's just a really funny fucking title.
I know.
You Shaft Among the Jews.
Yeah. I have a paperback of that. Exactly.
Shaft Among the Jews, the adaptation. I think that would be really great.
That's right. There you go. That's right. Also, there was also the other one, Shaft Has a Ball.
Oh yeah. Well, look, you selling paperbacks, man. Like, I have all the respect in the world for an eye-catching title. Whatever works.
And a lurid, and hopefully a semi-lurid cover.
An incredibly lurid. My father ghosted for a series called, no kidding, The Coxman, spelled with an X. They were all written by Troy Conway. And because my father was the only ghost who admitted he was writing these books, they're like 27, 30 books in the series. They're often all credited to him. And it's like, no, he just wrote 11 of them, just 11 of them.
Just 11. That's right.
But one of the best that he did get the title in there, The Cunning Linguist. So he wins the prize for lurid title, that will attract an audience.
That's right.
But yeah, it was the same thing when he wrote the Midwood sex novels in the 50s and 60s, Midwood and Beacon.
Yes.
Ton of best-selling writers wrote those books, but he was the only one who was like, The Little Black Book by Mike Avallone, I'm on board, like no shame, man. And
that's great.
I think shamelessness is a good thing. But
that's it.
Did Haim stay in France for most of his life, or did he come back to the States at some point?
He came back to the States now and then, because you can find it on YouTube. There was a show called Soul in the early 70s. In fact, there's a nice little documentary about the making of Soul. I mean, the man who was the brains behind it and what have you. Because he would have various guests on. He would have Farrakhan on. He would have. It was a music show, sort of pop culture show, but he also had guests on. So we'd have Farrakhan on and this and that. And there's an episode where he has Haim's on for a segment, and he's talking. So maybe this probably coincides with the time when the films were getting made, and they probably brought Haim's back for the promotional junket and what have you, and his name was kind of getting rediscovered, right? He was kind of getting known again.
Right.
So you can look at that interview, so the answer is, from what I understand, then he eventually, where he dies in Spain. I forget the town, but I think he and the wife then wind up in Spain, which is where he passes.
Right. And do you know about how old he was?
I don't, David. My recollection was I have read his age. I want to say 78 or 79, but I would not be adverse if somebody is looking that up right now on Wikipedia and correcting me. But it seems to me that he was in his late 70s, but I certainly could be mistaken. Oh, you cut out what? Wait a minute.
I had my mic muted for a second because my printer was running. He was 75.
There we go. Okay. All right. So right in the middle. There we go.
It's funny that you mentioned Soul, which I wasn't familiar with. Are you familiar with the other show called Soul that George Schlatter, the producer of Laugh-In?
Yeah.
In what year was this? I was very lucky to be able to see it. 68.
Yeah.
He did a pilot for basically Black Laugh-In.
I'll be damned.
And it was, if I find the video online anywhere, I saw it I went to a George Schlatter book signing and he had his tape of it, but it was Red Fox and George Kirby and Lou Rawls and Martha and the Vandellas.
Fantastic.
I feel like Nipsey Russell and Red Fox were the
hosts.
Yes. Yeah. White, written by an all black, right. He literally I can't remember the story he told, but it was something like he went to, a black high school in Los Angeles and said, "Give me your best writing students. I'm putting them in a room to write for a network television show."
Right.
I've seen it. It's an amazing show.
I'll be
really
damned.
Funny. It's really well written, and of course, and the network, of course, went, "Yeah, we were willing to let you shoot the pilot, hoping you would fall on your ass with your high school student writing staff. But now that you've done this beautiful pilot, no way in hell we're showing it to anybody." But yeah, Schlatter was ahead of the curve on that one.
That's amazing. Well, this segues back to One Shot Harry, set in 63 LA.
Right.
And the character's freelance photographer. So that's pertinent to this real quick story. So in the novel, I mentioned that Harry sometimes works for a black men's magazine called Dapper. Well, there was no such name for that magazine, but there was Duke. And Duke, in fact, lasted maybe 5 issues. It was a black men's magazine in the Playboy mold.
Uh-huh.
And in fact, boasted some original fiction, as Playboy does, or certainly did then, including a story by Ray Bradbury, I think, which the original title was
Way Up in the Middle of the Air?
The Last White Man on Mars.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's been reprinted under a different title, but it originated in the pages of Duke
Every
magazine.
once in a while, I feel like it gets grouped in with the Martian Chronicles.
Possibly, yes, I'm sure it does, because it has a different title now. But essentially, the premise is that black folks have now relocated to Mars.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's a story of his. I've considered reading it, but again, I don't think my voice or Bradbury's is the most appropriate for it. But there's one called The Other Foot.
Yes.
Which is about a black colony on Mars that has escaped to. Actually, it's a sequel. He did a story called Way Up in the Middle of the Air, where every black person in the South is leaving for Mars.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow.
And the story is told from the perspective of a white guy sitting on a porch going, "They'll miss us. They'll miss the South." And all the black people streaming by basically laughing at him going, "You have no idea how much you needed us.
Dig it.
And we're all going to be gone now. And who's going to cook your food, man? No one.
Right.
No one's going to cook your food." And they get on rockets and leave. And then there's another story called The Other Foot, where it's 30 years later.
So maybe it's the other foot that was originally. Yeah. That sounds right.
Where a white man shows up at the black colony on Mars.
That's right. There you go.
Says, "Look, we had a nuclear war. I got a ship full of survivors.
That's it.
Could you let us be here?"
Yeah.
And there's a momentary frenzy where the black denizens of the town start putting blacks only, drinking fountains up, and cordon off the back of the bus for white people and all that. And then at the end, of course, the community leader goes, actually, we're better than you, and we're not going to do any of
There
that.
we go. There we go.
Of course, you're welcome to come live with us as brothers. But I love that there's that initial like, hey, fuck them. We're going to oppress them exactly like we're going to do Jim Crow on Mars.
On Mars, that's right.
Reverse Jim Crow on Mars.
Right.
And then the momentary rage passes, and they go, you know what? It's fine.
That's
whatever,
right.
asshole. Come be on Mars with us.
That story was originally published in Duke. And
it makes sense that, Bradbury was definitely not fascinated by racial stories in his career. It's not a thing that comes up a lot in his work. So it kind of makes sense that like he heard about that market.
Yes.
And then Black people in science fiction.
Yeah.
I can do a thing.
I can
do a civil rights thing on Mars. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
So yeah. No, it is very interesting sometimes, particularly when writers from that period try to take on race.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, again, there's some language in it that's dated, but the other foot still reads pretty good. It's still, the basic premise is still solid.
Yeah.
And that reminds me, as a tangent, the whole thing about picking up another artist's work and going forward with it. If it's a great work, you still want to go, well, what were the flaws?
Mm-hmm.
What did the genius miss the first time? And with that TV version of Watchmen,
yes,
I kind of love that Damon Lindelof went, Watchmen is a brilliant graphic novel written by an Englishman about American culture who has no idea about the centrality of race in America.
Right.
And so he doesn't care about it at all. He's got one Black dude who's a sort of North Coast psychologist, and that's it.
Right. Well, no, there's two, right? There's the kid at the newsstand.
There's the little kid at the
yeah.
But even that is kind of like a hokey mid-century, sympathetic character has to be a little Black kid.
That's right.
But I love that Lindelof went, he really missed the boat on race. So I'm gonna make my Watchmen about race.
About race, yeah.
And it's brilliant.
It is.
It's really great stuff.
It is.
But anyway, thank you so much, Gary. I don't want to keep you too.
I appreciate you having me.
Oh, absolutely. And you want to come back and read, The Real Cool Killers, or if you or anything, or Mickey Spillane.
There we go. That's it. Yes, because we talked about it. We talked about One Deadly Night, where a hammer goes out and kills all the commies.
Yeah, I have never read that one. I have.
Oh, you got to read it. It's quite something.
I haven't. Yeah, I mean, Spillane is at his best. He's batshit.
Yes.
He's just absolutely, and it drove my dad crazy when they were compared to each other, because my father was his own kind of tough guy and a World War II veteran and all that, but he was a very gentle man. And Ed Noon is nothing like Mike Hammer in any way, shape, or form. And there's actually a book called There's Something About a Dame, where Ed Noon encounters a detective named Vince Devlin, who is transparently Mike Hammer. And kills him in the last scene, because he was like, fuck this comparison.
Dig it.
Anyway, man. So great talking to you. This will probably be up on Monday.
Very cool.
So I'll send you links and all that. But thank you so much for joining me, sir.
I appreciate you having me, man.